ISO 42001 is the ISO standard over artificial intelligence management systems. So in this part, we're going to see how this works and what it is meant to achieve. So basically, a management system tells you how an organization is supposed to work, and it covers everything from like the people, the tools, the processes, and everything that you would need to have in place for a function to work. In this case, artificial intelligence. It's for organizations that have it in place themselves. Every organization has a management system, and ISO formalizes it. It says what you should have in this. Does it directly tell you how to put in place, say, artificial intelligence or what products you have? Of course not. But everything that's around that for managing artificial intelligence itself is there. This is a little bit similar to a previous standard called ISO 27001, but I really want to draw the distinctions here. For one is that 27001 is over information security management systems, and it's also been in place for a lot longer, since October 2005, whereas ISO 42001 artificial intelligence management systems came out in December 2023 only. My opinion is that as we are with this new standard, 42001, it's still relatively generic, in my opinion, compared to the much more mature standard over information security, which has had over 20 years of maturity to build up on things. What this means is that on the older information security standards, things are a lot more clear as to what you need to do. It's a lot more elaborate. It really tells you different things you should put in place. It's pretty clear about the controls. Whereas for the new standard, it's a lot more, in my opinion, generic. Now, it still has, in my opinion, very good annexes. They didn't want to put too many details in the main standard, but it has very good annexes that really complete it, annexes on some controls that you should have in place and others on the risks. The big difference is that we need to do a very detailed risk assessment on our AI systems, because basically ISO doesn't know what those risks really are going to be. It's still a field which is just too new compared to, say, information security. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to show you what I call the risk funnel. ISO standards try to take all the different risks that we have from our operations and from the environment, and through different ISO standards, management system standards, reduce those risks from the big inherent risks we have from environment to residual risks, which are much smaller. One big difference between our information security standard is that indeed the things that really matter to ISO 27001 come from the wider world, cybersecurity threats, external threats, whereas ISO 42001 is about our internally implemented AI systems. And so it's really going to be risks dependent on the AI activities of the organization for our new AI standard. We're going to go through the entire management system framework. There are four big parts to it. The first one being planning. Planning on actually putting in place your ISO 42001. Actually doing it, the actual operations of it, checking that your artificial intelligence management system overall is working correctly, and then acting to putting in place those improvements. Now, for each of these, we're going to dig down deeper. So for the planning part, we have a context of the organization. Basically, you need to understand the organization itself. And in ISO, it's not just about understanding, it's actually about documenting. All of these steps will need to be documented. And so when I'm talking about context of the organization, it's about documenting this internal, external context, our stakeholders, and our different interests. Our leadership, making sure that we have proper leadership support, making sure that we have proper commitments from our leadership, planning the entire MS, that's artificial intelligence management system, making sure that we have the support, not just financial, but also in terms of tools, our operations themselves, making sure that our ongoing operations are well controlled, making sure that we have a proper system for evaluating our AIMS, and finally, making sure that anything detected for improvement is correctly put in place. So for each of these, we're going to go into even more detail. Context of the organization. I said internal context. For an internal context of the organization, we're basically saying what are our strengths, internal strengths, and what are our weaknesses. You could do this as a SWOT, taking the first two parts, strengths and weaknesses. In other words, for putting in place the AI management system, where are we good? Do we have already some positions in place? Do we already have some knowledgeable people? Do we already have a good, say, IT infrastructure? Do we already have maybe a development team? But on the contrary, what are our weaknesses? Do we lack people who really know about, say, AI data quality? Do we lack some of the more quantitative people? Can we have some limitations as to the resources we can put in place? All of those things is understanding the organization itself when it comes to actually putting in place the AI management system. On external context, so this is going to be your threats and your opportunities concerning the AIMS. So threats could be things that are could make it more difficult to put in our AIMS. Regulations that could make it more complicated to put in our AI systems in place, like the regulations might make it difficult to provide, say, the transparency that would be required by the regulation, making our whole system more complicated. Whereas on the other side, we'd have opportunities. We want to be a front runner compared to our competitors in these new technologies, and that would be an opportunity. We can look at interested parties and our stakeholders. So interested parties such as who is actually pushing for this management, who are our internal resources that would help on this. We have to think about stakeholders such as the regulator, such as our clients, such as our suppliers, and they all play a part in this. Note that for ISO, you need to document who all of these stakeholders are. You have to identify them at this stage context of the organization, because later on you're going to need to really see how you can satisfy each of these different parties. I'd like to just give another framework, which is that of OSEG. That's an organization which has been pioneering governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, for many decades now. And they also have a framework called the GRC capability model, which indeed covers these aspects, internal, external stakeholders, as well, adds a cultural dimension to it as well. The details from the GRC capability model can also help influence or at least advise how you could put in place this part of context of the organization, as well as some of the other aspects that we see in this ISO management system. So let's move on to leadership. On the leadership part, so let me just say that I have, for instance, seen indeed AI management systems being put in place where they had a pretty good artificial intelligence team. Now, I went there for a training, and I saw that they had project leaders, they had even people assigned for like the ethical dimension. They had a lot of things, but this was a partly public-owned organization, and partly publicly owned meant you had some kind of politicians in charge. The thing with politicians in charge is it's sometimes difficult to get a political commitment from a politician. And so this organization, partly public organization, actually lacked this high-level leadership and commitment, even though you'd expect this to be really a starting point for many of our management systems. So it's not always as obvious as you might believe. Trying to get management on board, your senior management on board, should really be one of the key things. And this can go all the way up to getting your board of directors or even your shareholders on board for this project. Otherwise, it might fail. And indeed, an ISO inspector that kind of detects that there hasn't really been a management commitment would put this as a completely blocking non-conformity from which you could not probably really get the rest of the system going. You need management commitment. The scope of the AIMS. So the scope should be defined. There are two different kinds of scopes. There's the scope of certification. So under ISO 42001, you are going to define a scope for certification, and your inspectors from ISO, they're going to basically check this scope of certification. Now, my recommendation is that for the scope of certification, keep it simple at the beginning. You can always extend it in the next couple of years, such as over a geographic scope and or maybe over just some of your systems. So in this case, some of your AI systems. Then the second kind of scope is basically your scope of operations of your, in this case, AI systems, and where you could have a large number of AI systems being put in place in your organization, but for the moment you're only going to get a few of them certified. And of course, this scope needs to be defined in a policy document. Going on to policy documents. So AI policies and procedures. So you're going to have an AI policy, but this is the one that's directly going to be over your AI management system. It's going to document all of these things that we're talking about right now in this big wheel over the management system. Another thing I would like to say is that all of your other policies affected by this will need to take into account this new policy. You can have risks from AI that are threats from outside of the organization. Now, remember our example about, say, a payment going out to a threat actor using artificial intelligence. Now, I wouldn't say that this goes into the AI policy. I would say this goes into our payment policy, maybe our accounting policies, where you need to take into account our new AI-enabled external environment for those things. So you need to make sure that all of your organization's policies are up to date for AI, and that you have specific AI policies for the AI systems that you have in place in your organization. Of course, you need to review them regularly. Internal organization. This is where you have your different AI roles and responsibilities defined. We go through the different AI roles and responsibilities, but indeed there are many different roles and responsibilities, from the person leading the projects to the person checking the ethics, managing the risks, checking on the compliance. AI systems really have a lot of different people who could be involved in this, even though a lot of these roles can be held by a single person managing some of these operations. We have an important part, which is the reporting of concern, and that's in the internal organization, because you need to make sure that you have proper channels of communication, of escalation for issues that arise. If you have incidents, especially ethical or compliance or regulatory incidents, you need to make sure that you have the internal reporting channels inside your internal organization. So in the section where you're going to be describing your internal organization, you need to put your reporting channels. Let's go on to planning. This is where you are planning the different steps of the artificial intelligence management system. A big part of this whole planning is going to be understanding the risks that you can see. Now, the annexes of ISO 42001 are going to be your friend here. You have a lot of descriptions about potential risks that you could have. That said, these are early days for AI, and your own risks are going to be different from the generic risks that are given in a standard. You need to understand what your own risks are going to be. And for each of these risks, you're going to see whether, first of all, you're going to have to evaluate them. You're going to have to evaluate your response, whether you actually take a fixed response to this kind of risk that you see. Usually you judge it on the criticality and on the likelihood of the AI risks that you see. And then if it is a sufficiently important, critical aspect, then you should definitely have controls in place, a response in place for the risks that you have. So we see from here that you need to assess the risks. You should assess the risk and respond to the risk. Don't forget about opportunities as well. You can assess opportunities that are from your AI system as well. You need to assess the impact on individuals and groups. Remember that AI systems could pose biases to certain groups. It might have discriminatory effects on certain groups, and so you should understand the impact on certain groups. If you have, say, a system that reviews CVs to determine whether people can get either promotions or actually have a position within an organization, then that is a high risk, high impact thing that would need to be properly assessed for its impact on different groups. So that's your AI system societal impact. Also, you need management guidance for AI system development and maintenance. A big part is basically having documented objectives. I'd like to say that, first of all of the ethical principles that we're going to see a bit later on should be put as objective. You want your system to be transparent, to be ethical, not to be biased, etc. You have other objectives next to that, such as it works correctly, it has reporting systems, it's efficient, effective, it brings value to our customers if that's the case of your AI system. And it will need to be put throughout the development process. Let's look at this development process. You're going to have defined criteria for each of the steps, from your requirements and specifications, your design and development, your verification and validation, your deployment of the AI system, your operations and monitoring. You have to put technical documentation and your recording of different events and incidents. You have to have defined criteria and requirements for the AI system over the entire life cycle. Okay, moving on to the do part of our entire management system. This is where you are directly doing the operations. A big part is to make sure that we have the proper support, and it's not just support in financial terms. A big part is the resources in terms of, for instance, data resources. For an AI model to work, you need data resources. You need data, you need sufficient data, and there are many different criteria for that. Data has to be acquired legally, has to be, of sufficient quality. You need to have tooling resources. What are tooling resources? I'm talking about things like AI algorithms, the different models that you have, different tools that will actually make it possible for you to have your AI systems in place. You have systems and computing resources, things like hardware on which your AI systems can run, data storage for your AI system, knowing that AI systems use enormous amount of both computing power and storage of the different AI models. So you need enormous amount of computing resources for AI systems. Human resources. This is particularly the case of persons with the necessary skills to put all of this in place and to fulfill all of the different AI roles that you have. And information for interested parties. So this is an important and often overlooked part. Our AI systems are meant generally for certain kinds of tasks. You can have systems that are meant for the wider world, such as, say, AI generation or AI image improvement or even AI chatbots. Here you can give information to your interested parties, but it is very difficult to restrict what these different parties can do. Whereas if it is restricted to, say, an HR department, a loan granting department, something that is for your own employees, or to a lesser extent to some of your clients or even suppliers, then you have a certain amount of power over these people, especially your own employees. In this case, you should have clear documentation over what they should be doing, what they're allowed within policies and procedures to do, or what they're not allowed to do. You should have system documentation and user information. These are very complex systems. If your, say, data engineer leaves the organization, there should be sufficient trace of what this person has done. So if they leave the organization, you can still go back and really understand what should be done to continue operations, what can be done also to repair problems that might in the future. External reporting, I'm talking especially about reporting to, say, regulators, but also to your different stakeholders. For instance, your board of directors might be very curious about the different risks that AI might pose to its different operations. Incident reporting is when you have problems on your system. Now, one of this part is whistleblowing. One of these parts is whistleblowing, where you really have something that would be fraudulent or even really discriminatory against a group, or would have big impacts against society. Now, when you say whistleblowing, people really shy away from this. So I prefer incident reporting for most of the cases. And a lot of this is simply going to be error reporting. Our system hit a roadblock, didn't really work for a certain reason. These should definitely have kind of an escalation procedure, or even just a procedure to deal with these within the normal course of operations. Information for interested parties. This is also a part that you're going to need to document within your management systems, your AI policy. We had identified our interested parties at the beginning. Here we need to understand what kind of information reporting we need to give to these different parties, either on an ongoing basis or at, say, quarterly or a yearly basis to some of these different parties. Now we're looking at the operations directly, and this is going to be so specific to each different organization, each different AI system, that I just put this line, controls and procedures, and another which is continuous risk and impact assessment. And I'm just putting these here. And in fact, in your AI policy, this is going to be maybe not necessarily a big step, but this is the 20% which really covers the 80% of work in many of these cases. Because it's going to be specific to your different things. It's going to be an ongoing thing. This is where your own assessment of risks is going to have to be extremely elaborate. And when I say controls and procedures, it seems very simple, but this is actually very expansive. You need to determine all the different controls that you're going to have in place. Here, your friend is the statement of applicable controls that you're going to find in the annex of ISO 42001. So what is this statement of applicable controls? This is where you need to say for each of these things in the annex whether this control applies to the organization or whether it doesn't apply. And if it doesn't apply, you need to justify why it doesn't apply. And if it does apply, you need to say, okay, what do we have in place? How does it work? Is it properly implemented? Who does it implicate? And all of the different things which really show what it's about, what kind of control you actually have in place. Data for AI systems. Now, data, of course, is critical for AI systems, and you have many different parts to this. You acquire your data in a certain way, and let's not forget that this data that you acquire has to be of high quality, because otherwise you're going to have to spend a lot of time or even money on cleansing this data. You're going to have to check the provenance. Now, the provenance means where it comes from. Especially, this is extremely important for copyright issues. You're going to have to prepare your data so that it can be used by your AI system. And then you look at the use of the AI system. You want to try to make sure that your AI system is used responsibly and for the people that you can control in your organization according to organizational policies. Check on the responsible use of the AI system. Check that it would fit the intended use of the AI system. And for your third parties, especially for clients and suppliers, you would try to make sure that even the legal responsibility would be well defined. So say you create an AI system, but this system could be misused. Now, you have said the system it's a chatbot or it's a system that can help an organization. But it is misused now to create, say, nefarious products, to find different tax avoidance schemes, to create illegal, say, chemical products or explosives. Now, this was never part of the things that you wanted this AI system actually to be able to create, but your client and or supplier might have used this in a wrongful manner. You need to have been very sure that the allocation of responsibility within legal documents is very well defined between you and your client and or supplier. Now we're getting on to the check part. Now, check means that you're looking over your AI management system. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're checking over your AI system itself, but rather over the whole management system. It has three different parts. You have monitoring of the system itself. So think about this. This basically means, say, the risk assessments being conducted on a regular basis? Are all of the roles and responsibilities actually fulfilled by humans on a regular basis? Are there any gaps in our hiring that have been open for so long that you wouldn't really be able to claim that your AI management system is working correctly without these roles being fulfilled? You have an obligatory step, which is a review by internal audit. Here's where you have internal auditors, which will look over the entire ISO 42001 and do a regular step. This is different from the inspection by ISO inspectors, who are basically ISO certified private individuals, usually belonging to consulting organizations, but that follow another ISO standard, which says that they're allowed to certify ISO 42001 and other ISO standards. And finally, management review. Our management needs to have reporting on the AIMS, needs to have a regular understanding about the whole management system itself. So this is where you evaluate your system, and on a step of improvement, this is where you act to improve it on a continuous basis. So for instance, all of our ongoing operational incident reporting, error reporting, this should continuously feed into our system for improving everything. And nonconformity and corrective action. Now, a nonconformity is the vocabulary that an ISO inspector is going to say for something that is problematic. A minor nonconformity is something that would generally be flagged by an ISO inspector and the ISO inspector would give you a bit of time to correct this thing. You might even be able to already be certified pending this problem being corrected within 3, 4, 5 months. But a major nonconformity is basically going to block your whole system, even just one of them. Not having leadership support, not having done a risk assessment, not having ongoing continuous monitoring are going to be major nonconformities in which you are not going to get certified until you have these things in place. Maybe the certification can actually be postponed until you have this in place, but you're not going to get certified with major nonconformities in your report. Okay, and that is the entire system itself. This is in not too briefly how you put over an entire management system. Do remember that every single one of these steps need to be documented within different AI policies, but this is basically how you do it.